The Bottle's Journey. One evening in summer, when the sun was setting, a man stood near the ocean. The sky was golden, and the waves were calm. In his hands he held a glass bottle. Inside the bottle, there was a letter. This letter was very special to him, with his deepest feelings written carefully. Chapter 1. A Letter on the Beach. Teresa Osborne stood on a cold, windy beach. It was December, and the sky was gray. The ocean looked dark, and the waves kept rolling onto the shore. Teresa hugged herself to stay warm. She was alone. Early in the morning, she had driven here from Boston. She had told her friends she was going Christmas shopping, but that wasn't true. Instead, she came here for something private and important. Teresa carried a small bag. She found a quiet spot on the sand and sat down. She opened the bag and took out an envelope. Inside, there were 3 old letters. The paper was thick, with a picture of a sailing ship in the corner. The ink was smudged, and the paper was fading, but the letters were very special to her. She looked at the letters and thought about the day she found the first one. It was summer, and she had been on a holiday in Cape Cod. One morning she went for a run on the beach. The beach was empty, and the sand felt cool under her feet. She loved mornings like this, with the calm ocean and fresh air. While running, she noticed something in the sand. At first, she thought it was a rock, but when she got closer, she saw it was a glass bottle. It was shiny and sealed with a cork, and inside, there was a piece of paper. She picked up the bottle and took out the paper. It was a letter written by someone named Garrett. The letter was for a woman named Catherine. Garrett wrote about how much he loved and missed her. His words were full of emotions, and Teresa felt his sadness and love. She read the letter again and again, amazed by how beautiful it was. Now, sitting on the cold December beach, Teresa held the letters in her hands. She had found 2 more letters after the first one. All of them were written by Garrett for Catherine. The letters made her curious. Who was Garrett? Who was Catherine? What happened to them? And why did Garrett send these letters into the ocean? Teresa looked at the waves. She felt connected to Garrett, even though she didn't know him. His words stayed in her mind, and she wanted to know more about his story. Chapter 2. Sharing the Letter. Teresa sat on the back deck of a cozy house near the beach, holding the bottle and the letter she had found. Her friend Deanna walked outside, holding 2 cups of coffee. Deanna noticed Teresa's face. "Have you been crying?" she asked. Teresa felt embarrassed and quickly wiped her eyes. "I'm fine," she said softly. "It's just, I found something this morning and it moved me." "What did you find?" Deanna asked, curious. Teresa handed the letter to her friend. Deanna took it, opened it, and began to read. She read slowly, her expression changing as she went through the letter. When she finished, she looked up at Teresa with teary eyes. "This is beautiful," Deanna said. "One of the most touching things I've ever read." Teresa nodded. "That's what I thought, too." Deanna looked at the bottle in Teresa's hand. "And you found this on the beach? Just like that?" "Yes," Teresa said. I was jogging this morning when I saw it in the sand. At first I thought it was just trash, but then I noticed the cork and the paper inside. Strange, Deanna said thoughtfully. The bay here is so calm. How did it make its way here? Teresa shrugged. I don't know. The bottle looks old, but the letter isn't. It was written only a few weeks ago. Deanna ran her fingers over the paper. The writing is so heartfelt. I wonder who Garrett and Catherine are. And why would someone put this letter in a bottle and send it out to sea? I don't know, Teresa admitted. But it's so personal. I feel like I shouldn't even have it. This was meant for someone else. Deanna smiled slightly. But it found its way to you. Maybe that means something. A conversation over coffee. Later that morning, Teresa and Deanna sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee. The letter was still on the table between them. Deanna couldn't stop thinking about it. You know, Deanna said, you should include this letter in your newspaper column. Teresa looked surprised. What? Why would I do that? Because people love stories like this, Deanna said. It's rare to find something so beautiful and real. Readers will love it. Teresa shook her head. But this letter is personal. It feels wrong to share it. What if Garrett or Catherine didn't want the whole world to see it? Deanna leaned forward. Teresa, whoever wrote this letter sent it out into the ocean. They must have known someone would find it. Besides, we can leave out their full names and any personal details. We'll just share the letter as it is. Teresa hesitated. She understood Deanna's point, but she still felt unsure. I don't know. I need to think about it. Of course, Deanna said. Take your time, but I really think this could be something special. Teresa's curiosity, that night, as Teresa got ready for bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the letter. Who was Garrett? Was Catherine still alive, or had something happened to her? The words in the letter were filled with so much love and sadness. Teresa felt a strange connection to the writer, even though she had never met him. Before going to sleep, she decided to include the letter in her column. Deanna was right. This story deserved to be shared. The next day, Teresa and Deanna went to a local print shop to type up the letter. Teresa added a short introduction, explaining how she found the bottle on the beach. Then they faxed the column to the Boston Times, where it would be published the following day. I hope this doesn't cause any trouble, Teresa said nervously. It won't, Deanna assured her. Trust me, people will love it. Chapter 3. The Response. Teresa returned to her Boston apartment after her vacation. She opened the door to the quiet, empty space, and her cat, Harvey, came running to greet her. She bent down to pet him, feeling the warmth of home, but also a sense of loneliness. Her son, Kevin, was still away visiting his father in California, and the house felt too quiet without him. After unpacking, Teresa checked her answering machine. There were several messages. 2 were from old friends asking if she wanted to meet, and another was from her mother. She decided to return the calls later. For now, she just wanted to rest. The next day, Teresa went to work at the newspaper office. She was greeted by her friend and editor, Deanna, who was waiting for her with a big grin. You were right to publish that letter, Deanna said. Have you seen all the mail? Teresa looked at her desk and saw piles of letters stacked high. There were over 200 of them. Teresa couldn't believe it. These are all about the column? She asked in surprise. Deanna nodded. It seems like everyone who read your column was touched by the letter. They wanted to share their thoughts and feelings with you. Teresa sat down and started reading the letters. Most of them were from women who said they were moved by Garrett's words. Some wrote about their own experiences with love and loss. A few men also sent letters expressing admiration for the beautiful writing. One letter stood out to Teresa. It was from a woman who said she wanted to meet Garrett. She wrote, "If he's single, tell him I'd marry him in a heartbeat." Teresa laughed at the boldness of the comment. A strange call. By the end of the day, Teresa was tired from reading so many letters. As she packed up to leave, the phone on her desk rang. She answered it. "Hello, is this Teresa Osborne?" A soft, unsure voice asked. "Yes, this is Teresa," she replied. "I read your column about the letter in the bottle. Can I ask you something?" Teresa was used to getting calls from readers, so she answered politely. "Of course. What would you like to know?" The woman hesitated for a moment before asking, "Was the letter addressed to someone named Catherine and signed by Garrett?" Teresa froze. How did this stranger know about the names in the letter? The column had not included their full names. "Who is this?" Teresa asked, her voice now serious. "My name is Michelle Turner," the woman said. "I live in Norfolk, Virginia. I found a similar letter 3 years ago on a beach here." Teresa's heart began to race. "Are you sure it's the same writer?" she asked. "Yes," Michelle said. "The paper had a picture of a sailing ship in the corner, just like the one in your column." "Do you still have the letter?" Teresa asked eagerly. "I do. I can fax you a copy if you'd like." Teresa gave Michelle the fax number at the office. After hanging up, she sat at her desk, her mind racing. Another letter? How many had Garrett written? And why? The second letter, the next day, Teresa arrived at work and saw the fax waiting for her. She picked up the pages with trembling hands. It was another letter from Garrett to Catherine. The paper was the same as the one she had found, with the sailing ship in the corner. The handwriting was identical, and the words were just as emotional. In the letter, Garrett wrote about his sadness and loneliness. He talked about how much he missed Catherine and how his life felt empty without her. He also mentioned their time together on a boat named Happenstance, which they had rebuilt together. The letter ended with the words, "Till death do us part." Teresa read the letter over and over. It was clear that Garrett had loved Catherine deeply. But who was she? And what had happened to her? Teresa felt a strong urge to know more. She decided to do some research. Maybe I can find Garrett, she thought. Chapter 4. The Third Letter. A few days after finding the second letter, Teresa couldn't stop thinking about Garrett. She wanted to know more about him and his story. One afternoon, while searching through articles at work, she decided to check for any other stories about messages in bottles. Her search brought up an old article from a magazine. The article mentioned a letter found on a beach in Long Island. The words quoted in the article sounded exactly like something Garrett would write. Teresa was convinced this was another one of his letters. Excited, she contacted the author of the article, a professor named Arthur Shendakine. After a little persuasion, he agreed to send her a copy of the letter. A few days later, the fax arrived. Teresa's heart raced as she read it. It was indeed from Garrett, addressed to Catherine. The letter spoke of his longing for her and how he felt lost without her. This was the third letter Teresa had found. Each one deepened her curiosity about Garrett. Who was he? Why was he sending these letters into the ocean? And what had happened to Catherine? The search begins. Teresa shared the letters with Deanna, who immediately encouraged her to find Garrett. "You already have some clues," Deanna said. His name, the mention of a boat called Happenstance, and the fact that he might live near the ocean. Together, they made a plan. Deanna called around to gather information, including contacting a registry for boats and local scuba diving shops. After several calls, they discovered that Garrett owned a boat named Happenstance and worked at a scuba diving shop called Island Diving in Wilmington, North Carolina. Teresa couldn't believe it. They had found him. "You should go," Deanna said. "Meet him and find out more." Teresa hesitated. What if he's not what I expect? What if this is a bad idea? "You'll never know unless you try," Deanna replied. Heading to Wilmington. That evening, Deanna helped Teresa book a flight to Wilmington. Teresa felt nervous but also excited. The next day, she packed her bags, arranged for her neighbor to watch her cat, and prepared to leave. As her plane touched down in Wilmington, Teresa looked out the window at the unfamiliar city. She had no idea what she would find or how Garrett would react if they met. But she was ready to take the chance. Chapter 5. Meeting Garrett. Teresa woke up early in her hotel room in Wilmington. The morning sun filled the room with warm light, and she felt both nervous and excited. Today, she planned to visit Island Diving, the scuba shop where Garrett worked. She didn't know what she would say or how he would react, but she was determined to meet him. After getting ready, she dressed casually in a white blouse and denim shorts to look approachable. She checked the address of the shop in her notebook and set out, driving through the small coastal city. Island Diving was located near the marina, not far from the ocean. The shop was an old wooden building, weathered by the salty sea air. Teresa parked her car and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. She had come so far. Now it was time to take the next step. First glimpse of Garrett. Teresa walked into the shop and looked around. The walls were lined with scuba gear, masks, fins, and oxygen tanks. Behind the counter, a man was helping a customer. He was tall and handsome, with kind eyes and a calm presence. Teresa instantly knew this was Garrett. She didn't approach him right away. Instead, she pretended to browse the shelves, listening to his voice as he spoke to the customer. His tone was warm and patient. It was clear he loved what he did. When the customer left, Teresa took a deep breath and walked up to the counter. "Hi," she said, her voice a little shaky. I'm interested in learning about scuba diving. Garrett smiled. You've come to the right place. Are you looking for lessons or just some gear? Maybe lessons, Teresa said. But I'm new to all this. Garrett nodded. No problem. We have classes for beginners. I can give you all the details. As he explained the classes, Teresa found herself feeling more at ease. Garrett seemed friendly and genuine, exactly the kind of person she had imagined when she read his letters. A connection begins. Teresa didn't tell Garrett about the letters right away. Instead, she asked him about the area and listened as he talked about the beauty of Wilmington and the nearby beaches. She noticed how passionate he was about the ocean and how his eyes lit up when he spoke. Before she left, she signed up for a beginner's scuba lesson. It was her way of staying connected to him without revealing too much too soon. As she walked back to her car, Teresa couldn't stop smiling. Meeting Garrett had been easier than she expected. He seemed kind, warm, and full of life, but she still didn't know how, or if, she would tell him about the letters. Chapter 6. Learning more about Garrett. The next morning, Teresa returned to island diving for her first scuba lesson. Garrett greeted her with a warm smile, which instantly put her at ease. "Are you ready to get started?" he asked. Teresa nodded, feeling both nervous and excited. Garrett introduced her to the basics of scuba diving, explaining the equipment and safety rules. His voice was calm and reassuring, making it easy for her to follow along. As the lesson went on, Teresa noticed how patient and knowledgeable Garrett was. He clearly loved teaching, and it was obvious that the ocean was a big part of his life. A friendly conversation. After the lesson, Teresa and Garrett sat outside the shop, overlooking the marina. Garrett offered her a bottle of water, and they began to talk. He told her about his life in Wilmington and how he had grown up near the ocean. "I've always felt connected to the sea," Garrett said. "It's where I feel most at home." Teresa listened carefully, feeling a stronger connection to him with every word. She was curious about his personal life, but didn't want to push too hard. "What about your family?" she asked gently. Garrett hesitated for a moment, then smiled sadly. "It's just me now," he said. "My wife, Catherine, passed away a few years ago." Teresa's heart ached at the mention of Catherine. She wanted to tell him about the letters, but decided it wasn't the right time. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said softly. "She must have been very special." "She was," Garrett replied. "She loved the ocean as much as I do. We used to sail together on our boat, Happenstance. Those were some of the best times of my life, a growing bond." Over the next few days, Teresa continued to take lessons and spend time at the shop. She and Garrett talked often, sharing stories about their lives. Garrett opened up little by little, and Teresa felt honored that he trusted her. One afternoon, as they sat by the water, Teresa finally found the courage to ask, "Do you ever write letters? I mean, just for yourself?" Garrett looked at her, surprised by the question. "I used to," he admitted. "After Catherine passed, it was my way of coping. I'd write letters to her and let the ocean carry them away." Teresa's heart raced. She now had confirmation that Garrett was the writer of the letters she had found, but she still didn't know how to tell him that they had reached her. A decision to make. That night, Teresa sat in her hotel room, thinking about Garrett and the letters. She felt a deep connection to him, but was unsure if she should reveal the truth. Would he be upset? Or would he see it as fate, the way she did? Teresa decided she would wait a little longer before saying anything. She wanted to be sure that Garrett trusted her, and that their growing friendship could handle such a revelation. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought about Garrett's words. "I'd let the ocean carry them away." Somehow the ocean had carried his letters to her, and she couldn't help but wonder if it was meant to be. Chapter 7. A Deeper Connection. Over the following days, Teresa and Garrett spent more time together. Whenever she wasn't taking scuba lessons, they would sit by the marina or walk along the beach, talking about their lives. Garrett shared stories about his childhood, his love for sailing, and the time he spent with Catherine. "I met Catherine when I was young," Garrett said one evening as they walked along the shore. "She was everything to me, my best friend and my partner. Losing her was the hardest thing I've ever gone through." Teresa listened quietly, her heart aching for him. She wanted to comfort him, but also felt uncertain. She still hadn't told him about the letters she had found, and the secret was beginning to weigh on her. A surprise visit. One afternoon, Teresa joined Garrett at his scuba shop. As they sat outside, a man approached, smiling warmly at Garrett. "Hey, Garrett," he said. "It's good to see you." "Hi, Jeb," Garrett replied, standing up to greet him. "It's been a while." Jeb turned to Teresa. "So you're the student Garrett's been talking about," he said with a wink. Teresa blushed. "I guess that's me." As the two men chatted, Teresa learned that Jeb was Garrett's close friend. Jeb owned a nearby fishing shop and often helped Garrett with boat repairs. Before leaving, Jeb smiled and said, "You should take her out on happenstance. Show her the real beauty of this place." Garrett nodded. "Maybe I will." Sailing on happenstance. The next morning, Garrett invited Teresa to go sailing with him. She felt a mix of excitement and nerves as she stepped onto happenstance, the boat Garrett and Catherine had rebuilt together. As they sailed into the open water, Garrett seemed more alive than ever. The wind blew through his hair, and his eyes sparkled as he talked about the sea. Teresa couldn't help but admire him. "You really love this, don't you?" she asked. Garrett smiled. "Being out here reminds me of Catherine. It's where I feel closest to her." Teresa stayed quiet, unsure how to respond. She didn't want to ruin the moment with questions or confessions. The letter revelation, that evening back at her hotel, Teresa stared at the letters she had brought with her. She knew she couldn't keep this secret from Garrett much longer. He deserved to know that his words had reached someone who cared deeply about them. The next time she saw Garrett, Teresa decided she would tell him everything. She hoped he would understand, and that their growing bond would remain strong. Chapter 8. The Truth Revealed. Teresa sat nervously across from Garrett at a small cafe near the marina. She had decided that today was the day she would tell him about the letters. Garrett, as always, looked calm and at ease, but Teresa's hands were shaking slightly as she held her coffee cup. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice unsure. Garrett noticed the seriousness in her tone and leaned forward. "What is it?" he asked gently. Teresa took a deep breath. "Before I came here, I found something. Something you wrote." Garrett frowned slightly, confused. "What do you mean?" Teresa reached into her bag and pulled out the envelope containing the 3 letters. She placed them on the table between them. "I found these," she said quietly. "They were in bottles. The ocean brought them to me." Garrett's reaction. Garrett stared at the letters in silence, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he picked them up and unfolded the first one. As his eyes scanned the familiar words, Teresa saw a mix of emotions on his face: shock, sadness, and something she couldn't quite place. "You found these?" he asked after a long pause. Teresa nodded. "Yes. The first one washed up on a beach in Cape Cod while I was on vacation. Then I found out about the others through people who had also discovered them." Garrett looked at her, his voice filled with disbelief. "I never thought anyone would actually find them." "They're beautiful, Garrett," Teresa said softly. "The way you write about Catherine, it's so honest and heartfelt. I couldn't stop thinking about you, and that's why I came here." Garrett leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "I wrote those letters to cope with losing her. It was my way of talking to her, even though she's gone. An emotional conversation." They sat in silence for a moment before Garrett spoke again. "When Catherine died, I felt like I had lost a part of myself. Writing to her was the only thing that kept me going. I never expected those letters to end up in someone else's hands." "I understand," Teresa said, "and I didn't want to invade your privacy. But your words, they moved me. I had to find out who you were." Garrett studied her carefully. "Why?" "Because I felt a connection," Teresa admitted. "Your letters showed me how deeply you can love someone. I haven't seen that kind of love in a long time." Garrett didn't respond right away. Finally, he said, "I don't know what to do with this. It's strange, knowing that something so personal is out there." Teresa reached across the table and touched his hand lightly. "I didn't mean to upset you. I just thought you should know that your words didn't disappear into the ocean. They found someone who cares." A new beginning. Later that evening, as they walked along the marina, Garrett seemed quieter than usual. Teresa worried that she had ruined their budding friendship, but then he stopped and looked at her. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "It means a lot that you cared enough to find me." Teresa smiled, relief washing over her. "You're welcome. I just hope you're okay with it." Garrett nodded. "I think I am. It's just a lot to take in." As they continued walking, Teresa felt that something had shifted between them. The truth was out, and though things were uncertain, she felt hopeful. Maybe this was the beginning of something new for both of them. To Chapter 9. A Growing Bond. In the days after Teresa revealed the letters, she and Garrett grew closer. They spent more time together, talking about their lives and sharing their thoughts. Garrett seemed more open now, as though a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. One evening, as they sat by the beach watching the sunset, Garrett spoke about Catherine again. "I thought my life would end when I lost her," he said. "But now, I feel like maybe there's a chance to move forward." Teresa listened quietly, feeling a mix of emotions. She cared deeply for Garrett but didn't want to rush him. She understood that healing from such a deep loss took time. An unexpected trip. One day, Garrett surprised Teresa. "How would you like to see happenstance again?" he asked. Teresa smiled. "I'd love that." They spent the day sailing, with Garrett teaching Teresa more about navigating the ocean. He showed her how to steer the boat and explained the different sails. For the first time, Teresa felt like she was truly part of Garrett's world. As the boat glided across the water, Garrett opened up about his dreams. "I've always wanted to take happenstance on a long journey," he said. "Maybe one day I'll finally do it." Teresa looked at him thoughtfully. "What's stopping you?" "I guess I've been waiting for the right time," he replied. "Or the right person." Teresa's heart skipped a beat at his words. She didn't know what to say, so she simply smiled and looked out at the horizon. New challenges. Their growing bond wasn't without challenges. Garrett was still deeply connected to Catherine's memory, and sometimes he pulled back emotionally. Teresa understood this, but couldn't help feeling a little hurt. She wondered if Garrett was truly ready to let someone new into his life. One evening, as they walked along the marina, Teresa decided to be honest with him. "Garrett, I care about you, but I need to know if you're ready for this. For us." Garrett looked at her, his expression serious. "I don't have all the answers yet," he admitted. "But I do know that I enjoy being with you. You've brought something into my life that I haven't felt in a long time." Teresa nodded, appreciating his honesty. "I just need to know that you're willing to try," she said softly. "I am," Garrett said, reaching for her hand. "But it might take time." Teresa squeezed his hand gently. "I can be patient. Hope for the future." As they parted that night, Teresa felt hopeful. She knew that building a relationship with Garrett wouldn't be easy, but she also believed it was worth the effort. Garrett was a good man with a kind heart, and she was willing to take the risk. For Garrett, the days ahead were full of uncertainty. But for the first time in years, he felt the possibility of happiness returning to his life. And as he watched Teresa walk away, he couldn't help but wonder if she was the person he had been waiting for all along. Chapter 10. A Morning Call. Teresa was sound asleep when the phone rang early in the morning. Groggy, she fumbled for the phone and recognized Garrett's voice immediately. "Did you make it home okay?" he asked. "Yes," she replied sleepily. "What time is it?" "A little after 6. Did I wake you?" "Yes." "I stayed up late last night, waiting for your call." Garrett laughed. "Sorry about that. I just didn't want to disturb you too early." "How are you?" "Good. Tired, but good." "I miss you," Garrett said softly. Teresa smiled, feeling a warmth at his words. "I miss you too." They talked for a while, sharing updates about their lives. Garrett admitted that he couldn't stop thinking about her and had even gone to work on his day off just to keep busy. Teresa returns to work. Later that morning, Teresa went to her office. Her coworker, Deanna, eagerly greeted her. "I've been dying to hear everything," she said, excited to know about Teresa's trip and her time with Garrett. Teresa, still lost in her thoughts about Garrett, gave Deanna a brief summary of her trip. Deanna teased her about how happy she seemed and how it was obvious she had enjoyed herself. As the day went on, Teresa found herself thinking about Garrett's words. She realized how much she missed him already and how deeply she was starting to care for him. Chapter 11. The Truth Comes Out. One evening, Garrett and Teresa sat together, but something felt different. Garrett looked serious, and Teresa knew something was wrong. "You found my letters, didn't you?" Garrett asked, his voice quiet but firm. Teresa nodded slowly. "Yes, I did. That's how I found you." Garrett's face changed, and he looked upset. "Why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning? Those letters were private. They were for Catherine." Teresa felt tears in her eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt you. When I found the letters, I was so moved. I just wanted to meet the person who wrote them. But they weren't meant for anyone else. They were personal." "You had no right to read them," Garrett said, his voice full of frustration. Teresa tried to explain. "I didn't mean to invade your privacy. I felt connected to your words." Garrett shook his head. "You should have told me the truth earlier." "Now, I don't know if I can trust you." Garrett walks away. The argument grew more intense, and Garrett decided to leave. He packed his things and took the letters with him. "Where are you going?" Teresa asked, her voice shaking. "I need time to think," Garrett said. "I can't do this right now." Teresa stood at the doorway, watching him leave. She felt her heart break as he walked away, unsure if he would ever come back. Chapter 12. Garrett reflects. After leaving Teresa's apartment, Garrett took a cab to the airport, unsure of where else to go. When he arrived, there were no flights available, and he spent the night at the terminal. He was angry and unable to sleep, replaying the argument with Teresa in his mind. The next morning, he managed to catch an early flight home. Arriving back at his house, Garrett went straight to his room, exhausted but restless. The events of the previous evening kept running through his head. Unable to sleep, he showered, dressed, and sat in his living room, surrounded by memories of Catherine. Garrett picked up a photograph of Catherine, his late wife, and placed it on the table. Nearby were the letters he had written to her, the same ones Teresa had found. With Catherine's picture in front of him, Garrett began rereading the letters slowly. As he read, he felt her presence in the room, bringing back vivid memories of their life together. In one memory, Garrett recalled a special evening when Catherine told him she was pregnant. She had arrived with groceries and a small surprise. When she handed him baby clothes and said, "You're going to be a father," Garrett felt pure happiness. Remembering this moment brought tears to his eyes. A conversation with Jeb. Later, Garrett's father, Jeb, noticed his truck outside and came to check on him. Jeb saw the photograph of Catherine and the letters on the table. Concerned, he asked, "Are you okay, son?" Garrett explained everything: his relationship with Teresa, her discovery of the letters, and the argument they had. Jeb listened quietly before speaking. "Garrett, don't you think you were too harsh on her?" Jeb asked gently. Garrett sighed. "She knew everything about me, but she hid this from me. She set it all up." Jeb shook his head. "She didn't set you up. She came to meet you because she was moved by your words. But falling in love with her? That was all you." A moment of realization, Jeb continued. "A few weeks ago, you told me you wanted to marry Teresa because you loved her. What's changed now?" Garrett hesitated, struggling to answer. Jeb said, "You're angry, not just because of the letters, but because she made you face something you didn't want to admit. You're holding on to Catherine, but maybe it's time to let go." Garrett didn't respond, but Jeb's words stayed with him. As the conversation ended, Garrett found himself questioning his anger and the choices he had made. Chapter 13. Saying Goodbye. Winter came early, and Teresa found herself sitting on the same beach where she had discovered the bottle months ago. The wind was cold, and the waves crashed loudly against the shore. Dark clouds covered the sky, signaling that a storm was coming. Teresa spent the whole day thinking about Garrett. She remembered their time together, their laughter, their talks, and the way he looked at her. But she also remembered the pain of their goodbye. She wished she could go back and say all the things she hadn't said. Life in Boston. After leaving Garrett, Teresa returned to Boston and tried to get back to her normal life. She picked up her son, Kevin, and focused on being a good mom. Kevin didn't notice her sadness at first, but after a few days, he could tell something was wrong. Teresa kept herself busy with work and parenting, but she couldn't stop thinking about Garrett. His voice, his smile, and the love they had shared were always on her mind. She felt like a part of her was missing. One afternoon, she met her friend Deanna for lunch. Teresa pretended she was fine and said, "It's better this way. I'm moving on." But Deanna didn't believe her. She just smiled kindly and let Teresa talk. Finding peace. As the months passed, Teresa slowly began to accept what had happened. She stayed in touch with Jeb, Garrett's father, who told her stories about Garrett and Catherine. These stories helped her heal, but the pain of losing Garrett was still there. One day, Jeb said gently, "It's time for you to let go, Teresa. Garrett would want you to be happy." His words stayed with her, and that night, Teresa cried for a long time. The next day, she decided to visit Cape Cod one last time. Goodbye to the past. On the beach, Teresa stood where she had found the bottle. The ocean stretched out before her, wild and powerful. She thought about Garrett and everything they had shared. Her heart felt heavy, but she also felt thankful for the time they had together. As the wind grew stronger and the first drops of rain fell, Teresa whispered, "Goodbye, Garrett." She felt a sense of peace as she turned to leave. It was time to move forward and find happiness again.